How does that shake the nation and wake it up that there's a better way to live than what we're seeing played out in the streets of Los Angeles?
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, I think that I always put the responsibility on us, on conservative people and people of faith, because I don't want to shut anybody up. I don't want the left to be quiet. I don't want atheists to be quiet. I want everybody to have a voice, because I know I can win that argument. What I want to bring to an end is essentially the gray list that exists in Hollywood to silence certain voices. And the only way that's going to come to an end, the only fair way that can come to an end, is if people of faith and of values start to enter the culture. There are too many people, and I don't know whether to call them conservatives, traditionalists, whatever you want to call them, who have simply resigned from the culture, who simply say, oh, I don't go to the movies anymore. I can always catch Turner Classics and see a good Bette Davis movie or whatever. Or, and I know a lot of Christians disagree with this because I talk to a lot of them out here, but I also think that Christian movies that only speak to Christians are of limited value. I think the Christian movies in which everything is happy, nobody curses, everybody who sleeps around out of wedlock is punished, that represent a world that basically doesn't exist, are not as helpful as things that address the culture in the voice of the culture, that speak the culture's voice and yet speak good values and speak faith into that culture. I think that we need a widespread effort to build an infrastructure of reviews and awards and studios and things like that. Look at, for instance, late night comedy. Every single late night comedian looks like every other comedian, thinks like them, makes the same jokes, has the same political opinion. There's not one, we can't manufacture one comic voice of faith, one comic voice on the right that can speak to ordinary people who may not believe, who may not agree, and yet make jokes that show them that point of view.
I was going to say the art of late night comedy is gone. It's a lost art. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
They all think that they have a responsibility to speak to the culture, and they're not funny anymore. That was an art that passed many, many years ago with Johnny Carson and people like that. Today's guys, with as funny as they think they are, they're not as funny as they think they are. I have some questions about the hypocrisy. I know we got to take a break, but I have some questions about the hypocrisy of Hollywood I want to bring up after the break.
When we come back after the break, Trey gets to ask his questions, Mr. Klavan gets to give us some insight, and you get to hear the answers. You're watching the Hagee Hotline.
From Matt Hagee comes a revealing look at preparing for the end of the world, your guide to the apocalypse. Reassuring for those that believe, eye-opening for those that don't.
There's about to be an unveiling. The curtain is going to be pulled back. The apocalypse is about to occur. Are you ready?
A book both you and your loved ones need to read. Order now. Call or visit us at jhm.org.
Dear Pastor Hagee, I just wanted to write you to say how honored Rayla Jean and I are to have been partners in your ministry all these years, and to see all the amazing things you've accomplished around the world with the gifts we and others like us have gladly given over the years.
I want to thank you for making it possible for us to preach the gospel to the nations of the world. Thank you, and God bless you.
Become a partner today. Call the toll-free number or visit jhm.org.
Welcome back to the Hagee Hotline. We're talking about the harassment scandal that's rocking Hollywood. And since that dam has proverbially broken, there's been a number of individuals speaking out in terms of accusation, past experiences. But Trey, you mentioned before the break that there's a lot of hypocrisy in this issue. Andrew Klavan's our guest today, and he's worked in Hollywood. This is something that he has had success at as a profession, in a place that's very hard to succeed in, but still, kept moral clarity, kept his faith, and continued to be engaged in an industry where they say, when in Rome.
Yeah. And I'm curious, too, Andrew, about the hypocrisy concerning radical feminists who are out there in Hollywood. This is what I mean by this. We're finding out that the Weinstein story is just the tip of the iceberg, the point of the spear, that every day there's another accusation made about somebody else, and they call this the worst-kept secret in Hollywood. And right after President Trump was elected, we had the Women's March in Washington, D.C., where some radical feminists got up and spoke very harshly of President Trump. But they went on apparently for many, many years and never said anything about Weinstein and about these other guys that have been accused of this, yet they knew it all these years. So how is that possible? How can you be a feminist and stand up for women, yet keep this secret hidden that these women were being either assaulted and or harassed all these years by these men in power in Hollywood?
Well, Trey, it's actually worse than that. If you think back when Bill Clinton was accused of all the things that he was accused of, including a very violent and bloody rape, feminists rushed to his defense. And one feminist famously wrote that women should be lined up to have sex with Bill Clinton to thank him for preserving their right to have an abortion. So they lost all their moral authority in that moment. And certainly Weinstein, I'm sure, was heavily protected by the fact that he was a major, major Clinton donor. And it is only the fall of the Clintons through Hillary's loss in the election that has basically freed feminists to live out the meaning of their creed. I myself have another beef with the feminists in that I think that a lot of what they say about human sexuality and men simply isn't true and creates a very, very dangerous situation for women. It's almost 50 years now, feminists have been telling us that manly men are a bad thing, that men who believe themselves to be white knights toward women or who have a protective or gentlemanly attitude toward women are being patronizing and sexist. And the fact is, when you remove those guys, when you remove the protective guys, when you remove the guys who believe in being a gentleman, you're just left. Harvey Weinstein is all that's left. Harvey Weinstein and all the guys who aren't big enough and manly enough to stand up and stop him. One of the things that was shocking to me about the Harvey Weinstein scandals is where were all these actresses' husbands? Where were their boyfriends? How come nobody knocked Weinstein, down a flight of stairs? The only guy who comes out even half well in this is Brad Pitt, who at least went and told him to leave his girlfriend Gwyneth Paltrow alone. I mean, it's not exactly Gary Cooper, but it's something. And I think that feminists have undermined some of the standards of masculinity and some of the values of masculinity, and have accused all men of being rapists and accused masculinity of being toxic, as they say, and have left these women defenseless because after all, when it comes down to it, Weinstein is like a 300-pound monster. And when he corners a 110-pound woman in a corner, she's not getting out of there. I think that feminists have undermined men, and in doing so have left women exposed.
Well, and, when you speak about hypocrisy and the dichotomy of this issue, you have one individual who's certainly a Hollywood insider for many, many decades, Hugh Hefner. He's celebrated. He's celebrated as a pioneer. He's celebrated as a success, and yet it's probably the corrupt work of an individual that makes his money in pornography like Hugh Hefner that taught Harvey Weinstein how to behave the way he did. How is one man put in a spotlight and cheered and the other man basically shunned after years of being on the insides of Hollywood?
Well, I think, unfortunately, Hollywood is a fantasy factory, and I think a lot of these people actually live in their fantasies. Hugh Hefner put forward this fantasy of a wonderful life where you could have all the women you want without consequences, where the women were happy to serve, where he was